But come July, that was predicted to be the end of oil supply in Europe, basically. And we're going to have a tremendous problem because the U.S. was trying to make up for that supply by shipping our oil there at elevated prices, thereby raising gas prices. So Trump was facing essentially a terrible result. The oil cutoff basically was going to happen around July 1st. And that's why he was desperate for this deal. And what I'm here to tell you today is this deal is very, very shaky. There's a lot that can go wrong here and that is going wrong as we speak. The key in general to being healthy and surviving is to stay out of the establishment medical system. Insiders have said we don't want drugs that cure, we want drugs that manage chronic illnesses so that they continue to come to us on that. The establishment will tell you financially, of course, you stay with the stock market, you stay with the growth and which is dependent on inflation. But those markets are going to collapse when this war comes, because I think there's going to be an EMP strike that'll take down the grid for up to a year. And that means that anything from cryptos to bank accounts to stocks are not going to be accessible.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. I'm privileged to have this widely followed returning guest, Joel Skousen, an expert on both defensive architecture and strategic relocation, as well as geopolitical events, joins us this Thursday, June 18th, 2026. Joel, thank you for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Well, it's great to be with you, Donegan, and certainly the time couldn't be more appropriate.
There's been so much happening in our world that it's important for us to keep abreast of things and to keep looking forward. And that's what you help your readers do at the World Affairs Brief. We wanted to follow up with you on some specific questions surrounding some of the analyses that you've done recently. Some of them are rather, I would say, surprising, if not controversial, statements that you've made, and we wanted to drill in a bit with your help to understand how it is that you've come to be convinced of these positions, as they're important to understanding the world that people look at today. And it's not typically what they're being told on the mainstream financial or geopolitical press. One is your statements recently that the U.S.-Iran war narrative was largely driven by Israeli influence and ended because the U.S. was losing leverage in the region. Can you talk to us about why you believe that?
Well, it's really open knowledge now that in the Situation Room meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, he had the head of Mossad on a television screen with him, and they basically gave him a Hollywood-type presentation of where this war was going to go. It was going to be easy. We're going to decapitate the leaders. We're going to get regime change. We're going to destroy all their weapon sites, and it's going to be over in 3 or 4 days. And Trump really likes to play the role of the king of the world. I'm going to solve all the problems. And this was very enticing to him, that this could be an easy 3-day war and it would be over. And it turned out to be everything but that. There wasn't regime change. And even though they did a lot of destruction to missile and other facilities in Iran, they failed to decapitate most of the Iranian supplies underground, which were so extensive that we estimate now that Iran has 70% of their missiles still remaining after the U.S.-Israeli attacks. And so basically what Trump has run up against is that what they didn't anticipate, or what the Israeli downplayed, was the issue that Iran held a card that was very strong, that they could shut down the Strait of Hormuz and basically disrupt oil shipment of 20% of the world. This happened, and the effects were delayed somewhat because of the fact of oil already in process of shipping and some of the leakage that went through. For example, Trump agreeing to let Iran continue to supply China with oil. But come July, that was predicted to be the end of oil supply in Europe, basically. And we're going to have a tremendous problem because the U.S. was trying to make up for that supply by shipping our oil there at elevated prices, thereby raising gas prices. So Trump was facing essentially a terrible result. That is the oil cutoff basically was going to happen around July 1st. And that's why he was desperate for this deal. And what I'm here to tell you today is this deal is very, very shaky. There's a lot that can go wrong here and that is going wrong as we speak, as Israel continues to strike Lebanon, which is a central part of point number 1 in the 14-point memo of understanding, that this deal includes Lebanon, that Israel must stop fighting. And the implication of that is that the U.S. has to stop Israel because Israel isn't stopping. And Trump has tried on 2 occasions, including using expletives to the face of Netanyahu, and he isn't stopping. So it doesn't look like to me that Trump is going to be able to use or have the courage to use military blackmail to get Netanyahu in compliance with this deal.
Regarding the timeline, coming to a crisis point, forcing Trump's hand to bring an end to it at this time, there have been several analysts reporting that not only the U.S. but other nations have had to draw down their strategic petroleum reserves and that they were about to run dry. Even a major facility in the central southern U.S. that's been basically a major industry repository within 1 week of running dry. You did make a statement in your recent World Affairs brief about characterizing U.S. policy as a reluctant retreat rather than a victory. Can you draw any finer explanation about the timeline of coming to a crisis point at this time?
Well, all of the oil experts that I have read say that the timeline comes around the first week of July when everything runs out, and there's dozens of sources out there that basically say and they confirm that general time. And most of that depends, of course, on Europe, which is the most vulnerable, has no direct sources of oil, has to import everything. And then California as well. California still ships in most of their oil since they do not have pipeline connections even to the Intermountain West, where Utah produces limited amounts of oil. But they certainly don't have a pipeline to Texas or any of the other major oil-bearing regions. They had their last shipment of oil approximately 2 weeks ago. And so they've been out, and that was threatening to double gas prices in California. But the political fallout for Trump on that issue was going to be tremendous. And Trump is very adverse to bad publicity. I mean, he is extremely proud. I've never seen a more arrogant, egocentric president in my entire life than Donald Trump. And he can be manipulated because of that. And he can be flattered, as Netanyahu always flatters him. Putin flattered him. Xi Jinping flatters him. Everybody knows that you can get what you want out of Trump if you flatter them. But I'll tell you, when reality faces, Trump gets mad. He gets angry, like he did in his expletive-laced telephone call to Donald Trump. And then, as I'm covering in tomorrow's World Affairs brief, he kind of backtracked against that. He said, well, Netanyahu's a really nice guy after all. He just is exercising bad judgment. So he's downplaying it. And the reason he's downplaying it, Dunnigan, is because he doesn't want to force or use the military baseball bat against Israel by saying, I'm going to cut off your supply of weapons. He's not going to do that. I'm convinced. He's going to let Israel continue. And he doesn't realize that Israel has this larger Israel agenda. They're purposely antagonizing and going after Lebanon as a government because they essentially want to expand Israeli control over the neighboring countries rather than just defend Israel. Now, Israel has a right to defend itself, but this expansion threat to take over Lebanon and next Jordan and other areas is something that really disturbs the Gulf leaders, and that's why they have been reluctant to buy into the Abraham Accords, which Trump tried to say, as part of this agreement, we want you to all normalize relationship with Israel, and they don't want to do it. In fact, it's only strengthened the secret arrangements that several of them made with Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar, and others that have actually paid money to Iran to get off their target list. So the opposite is happening for what Trump thought was going to be happening as a result of this war.
You've also made comments recently that in your view, in the war in Ukraine, which has been dragging on far longer than we were originally told that it was likely to, that Putin is losing the war in Ukraine. Can you talk to us about why you say that and what you think the implications are going forward?
First of all, the casualty rate of soldiers, and most of these are recruits and conscripts, and a lot of people, these are recruits that couldn't pay their way out of conscription. This is a very corrupt system in Russia. And in fact, these recruits who show up at the battlefield are expected to pay off their higher officers to keep them off of the front lines, because 40,000 troops, more or less, each month are being killed in Ukraine, Russian troops. And that's happening because of drone warfare. Ukraine has AI-directed drones now that simply hover in terms of their fuel and other things. They have drones constantly hovering over the front lines, and they pick off soldiers whenever they come out, and they pick off tanks that they're now hitting trucks and trains behind the front lines, so the logistics are not getting to the front line. So Russia has simply not made any progress anymore at all in the past month and a half, and in fact is losing ground, not to mention the 40,000 soldiers. So Putin is in a very bad way in having to consider making a deal to get out of this war because of the unpopularity of it. But he's definitely not making progress, and in that sense, he's losing, given the fatality rate.
What do you see as the implications of that going forward for the European region, but also for the U.S.?
Well, it fortifies the European, and this just came out in the G7 summit, it fortified the European opinion. They were right to back Ukraine, and Zelensky, made an appeal and said, we still need support. We are winning, and we are progressing against the Russians. The most important thing that Ukraine needs to do is take back the inroads that Russia has made towards Odessa. Because if Russia is able to close off their southern port, they can close off their ability to ship grain and other products and get back into the world economy. And so Zelensky was making that case. And Trump apparently had a good meeting with Zelensky. He wasn't dismissive, as it normally is. And it looks like even though Trump will never come out openly against Putin, his ego demands that he has a good relationship with all of the dictators of the world. He doesn't care about the little guys, but the big boys impress Trump. And so he'll never admit, the Putin or Xi will betray him until it actually happens. But I think the implications are that the war in Ukraine is going to get resolved probably within this year. And unfortunately, the war in Iran is not going to get resolved because Israel is trying its best to sabotage the Lebanon aspect of that. Iran will retaliate against Israel, and Netanyahu is hopeful that he can drive the U.S. back into war against Iran because of the seriousness of the retaliation that Iran is planning if Israel doesn't stop attacking Lebanon. So what I'm just saying is that the markets have breathed a sigh of relief over this. Oil prices are down, but it's not going to last.
Another theme that we wanted your clarification of is the proposition that you've advanced through many different arguments that there's a transnationalist, globalist network that remains one of the three major strategic power shaping events in the world. Not just this East-West dichotomy that is so often portrayed in the mainstream geopolitical press. And that because of that, if we understand correctly, major events you see as being best understood through hidden coordination rather than just conventional statecraft. Can you help us understand your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure specifically where you're going, but in general speaking, I am the only analyst that really says there are three predator centers. I do not believe that Russia and China are united except temporarily in terms of their desire to take down the West or the Western globalists. The Western globalists, as I have outlined in all of my writings, built these two enemies, Russia and China, and gave them, especially in Lend-Lease during World War II, where we gave Russia not only all of the plans to our military technology, we built truck plants for them in Russia, But after Lend-Lease was supposedly to end after the war, we continued to give them the plans to the nuclear weapons and the first shipment of enriched uranium so that they could explode their first weapon in 1949. During the Nixon administration under Henry Kissinger, who was his national security advisor, we gave them the technology to MIRV their missiles, meaning put multiple warheads on, by giving them the miniature ball-bearing technology to create the miniature gyros necessary for guidance. Now, but, unlike the Birch Society, who came to the conclusion that the globalists control both Russia and China and brought them to power, it's really a one-way street. In other words, we facilitated these enemies because from the globalist standpoint, another Third World War, the UN came to power, a global government without any powers came to power in World War II, but they need one more war to get us into a global government with total control, taxing power, military power, etc. And that's the purpose for building up these two enemies. And so that's my basic theory, understanding that the Russians faked their own demise in 1989 to 91 to get Western aid and trade, that they are still communist, but they are wary of the Chinese communists, which they helped build up through technology, nuclear weapons, but they're no longer sharing military technology with China. China's ahead of them now. Russia realizes that China, even though they're bound to help them in the coming nuclear attack on American military targets, they feel that China will take them on and eliminate them after they've eliminated the West. So these are interesting times, and I think my theories are going to be proven correct.
You've also talked to us in the past about ways that even on a more domestic front, the domestic home, how people can maintain an exceptionally healthy family to be prepared to survive and thrive no matter what comes our way. Can you talk to us about how you help to explain to people they need to prioritize health, wellness, well-being, and what you see as the keys to achieving that?
Well, the key in general to being healthy and surviving is to stay out of the establishment medical system. This is extremely important. Vaccines are extremely dangerous. There's no way to mass produce a safe vaccine there'll always be side effects. But the entire medical system based upon drugs rather than herbs. I mean, I'm nearing 80 years old, Dunnigan, and I'm in perfect health. I still exercise and do strength exercises, still run, don't have joint problems, and I completely rely on herbs and vitamins and other things to cure anything that may come my way, but I hardly ever get sick. And you can't say that about people who depend on the medical system of drugs and things, which don't really cure things. In fact, the drug people, insiders have said, we don't want drugs that cure, we want drugs that manage chronic illnesses so that they continue to come to us on that. Now, the establishment will tell you financially, of course, you stay with the stock market, just stay with the growth, and which is dependent on inflation. But I strongly oppose that. Inflation, true rate of inflation is about 3 times the CPI. Real estate has kept pace with that, and of course the stock market does, but the stock market depends on the inflation of the Fed, which first runs through the Wall Street banks, and they're able to finance the growth of the markets. But those markets are going to collapse when this war comes, because I think there's going to be an EMP strike that'll take down the grid for up to a year, and that means that anything from cryptos to bank accounts to stocks are not going to be accessible. And so what you prepare and stockpile has been my mantra for my career as one of the pioneers in the preparedness movement. What you stockpile is what you're going to have when this war comes. And I do not believe, and let me just end with this, Dunnigan, I don't have an optimism that we're going to prepare to survive and get on the other side of this war and that we'll recover as we did in World War II. My fear is that if we have an EMP strike and combined with the nuclear strike on military targets only, I don't think they're going to hit cities. But that EMP strike means that there'll be total chaos for about a year, and about 80% of Americans may starve to death. And I'm not sure you recover from that. I'm not sure you can forgive people who have come and pillaged and stolen time and again what you have. And so there may be a long, long period of tribulation to follow that we don't recover from rapidly.
I guess I'll press further into that. We certainly have historical precedent for serious famine. For example, in the Old Testament story of Joseph, who became advisor to the Pharaoh of Egypt after 7 years of plenty and stockpiling grain and foodstuffs, and then 7 years of famine. And people came first from their country, then from surrounding countries, and they were bringing the first money that they had. And after money was gone, they started selling their land. And after their land was gone, they started selling their own services in servitude. What do you foresee as likely ways that a culture such as ours would deal with widespread hunger, and what do you think are ways that individual families should prepare for that eventuality?
Well, given the seriousness of how I think this is going to go down, beginning with World War III, I think the whole world changes that we live in. And as I say, you have what you have in your home. There's no stores anymore. After 3 days, the shelves are empty. You can't order anything from the internet. It's down. So you think about that for a moment, how much you depend on Amazon to ship things to you, and it's not going to happen. And so the important thing to realize is that those valuables, whether there are food, whether there's water, whether there's electricity, a lot of you people have developed solar generators and physical generators to keep electricity on. But all of that makes you a magnet for people who are without, who are coming to your house because you have your lights on and you think they've got something prepared and they want it. And I'll tell you, it's going to be a very difficult choice to confront someone at the door who knows that, you take something like me, who's a preparedness expert with a nationwide reputation. If a person come to the door and I'm at the door, I'm not going to be able to convince them I don't have anything to share. I'm going to have to tell them I can't share with you. And that's not going to go down well. And so one of the ways to prepare against that is to have what we call a safe room, a portion of your basement space that is completely sealed off and disguised so that you don't know that anything is there. And that's where you stockpile things. And so you don't even have to answer the door. You can lock yourself into a secure safe room that is basically a concrete reinforced box that nobody can break into, and you don't answer the door. You leave it open so if they don't have to break the door or the windows, they come in and pillage and they move on. Now, that's a much smarter thing than taking out a weapon and trying to shoot hundreds of people coming down the street because they're simply starving, and that's morally wrong. I don't mind defending myself if I'm confronted with somebody with a weapon aggressive in front of me, threatening to kill me unless I do something. But just starving people, I think you just have to get out of the way. And people need to prepare in advance for that. You've got to prepare a safe room in advance. You can't build those types of things once the crisis has arrived, and they have to be carefully concealed. And you can't hire a lot of it done because then the workers know what you've got. And so learning to repair, to build, and to manage these things on your own is something I know wealthy people are sometimes reluctant to do, to get their hands dirty and learn to repair, but it's a necessity someday.
Could you touch on books that you have written that are available right now for people who want to learn more about these topics and the in-depth research you've done both on strategic relocation and defensive architecture?
Yes, I've written 3 books along with my son, who's an engineer, Andrew Skousen. The first book that I wrote in 1979, that's how far I go back into preparedness, is called The Secure Home. It's 700 pages covering everything in preparedness, from strategy to bulletproof windows, doors, and you don't need all that necessarily if you've got good hidden spaces, which we talk about how to design those things. Another book we have that is less intensive than new construction is called the High Security Shelter book. And that covers how to do a concealed safe room in an existing basement, which is most people's cheapest option. And the other book is Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, my bestseller, been in print with multiple editions since the year 2000. And the price has never gone up in 26 years. It's still only $35 from joelskousen.com. It's available on Amazon too, but I prefer you patronize us without patronizing the beast.
Joel, you've been with us for years and years here. Back when we were called Reluctant Preppers, and now under Liberty in Finance, we're still trying to help people prepare to survive and thrive, and to do it in a way that supports their family, their faith, and their community. Any final words from you on those things, family, faith, and community?
Yes, one of the problems that people face is that usually one or the other in the family is just not interested in preparedness, and it just doesn't see the future. And that's why I began to write my World Affairs Brief clear back before the year 2000, so that I could help give people the evidence that this war is coming, and the nature of the deep state and the nature of the conspiracy which controls our government despite what we elect politically. And so that may be of assistance if you want to subscribe to the weekly World Affairs Brief. Friday's one will be very, very interesting. I'm going to cover the analysis of Andrew Fox of Britain, who has probably the best summary of the entire Iran war, which you really won't want to miss. But that's worldaffairsbrief.com, and you can also get there from joelskousen.com.
Well, Joel, we're always grateful for your visits here, and this is no exception. Thank you for joining us again on Liberty in Finance.
My pleasure, Dunnigan. Thank you.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty in Finance. Premiums are rising on 90% silver coinage. But right now, you can still send us your 3/9 fine silver bars or rounds, and we will swap them into 90% constitutional silver half dollars for a 3% fee with no cash out of pocket. And we'll even pay inbound shipping. Some restrictions apply. Call us for details. Call us at 1-888-815-4237. That's 1-888-81-LIBERTY for details.